Hey, Narrate, Ales for Trails is just 2 months away. If you've not heard, Ales for Trails is a local beer festival that raises money for the Helena Trail system, and we, Narrate, get to be a part. There's about 150 volunteers that help to make the day of Ales for Trails happen, and also throughout the year, and there are lots of ways to get involved. Ales for Trails will be on Friday, May 16th, downtown at Pioneer Park. There are all sorts of roles from setup to teardown. You can be at Volunteer Central, helping to show volunteers where to go. You could sell merch at the merch table, sell tokens. There are lots of spots at the entrance gates or ticket tables. There are also several spots left to pour beer. There is a mandatory training to pour beer if you'd like to do that, and those roles fill up really fast. So let me know if you are interested in any of those. Please email me, hannah@narratechurch.org, if you would like to get involved or need more information. Thanks.
12, 7 through 11. Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong.
Thanks, Mom. Good morning, everyone. As Adam said, I am Kimberly Collins, and I am hailing from the land of 10,000 lakes in Minnesota, but I am actually a Montana native and born and raised in this fantastic state, and it was such a treat this morning and this weekend to wake up to the mountains again. And like Adam said, I am the daughter of long-standing Narrate members, Jim and Andy Darling. You can see us up there on the screen, and I'm just so grateful to be here this morning. I came to the Enneagram by way of necessity. I was 6 years deep into co-founding an orthodontic practice in Rochester, Minnesota. I had 35 employees, thousands of patients, and 3 little kids at home, and I was losing it. In other words, for this Enneagram type, I had 99 problems, and all of them were people, especially their emotions. And I had a friend take pity on me and introduce me to the Enneagram as a way of kind of managing my own emotions. She was like, girl, you need some help. And I agreed, and I looked into the Enneagram, and I saw that it was really, really helpful for me managing my own stuff. And I got certified in it, and I started applying it to my management style and how I interacted with my team. And I found that by understanding my team, I was able to have better communication, and we had better, more productive conflict, and we had a more harmonious workplace. So this is what I do full-time now, is I talk to teams about how the Enneagram can help them in their workplace and create a better, more harmonious workplace for them. So when Adam asked me to speak this morning, I was a little like, oh, what am I going to talk about? Because I didn't think that the message of Enneagram in the workplace is going to help you get more productivity was really going to translate to a Sunday morning. So I decided to think about what I do as an executive coach and a consultant and look at it from a 10,000-foot view and see if there were any messages of hope and direction that could be distilled from what I do. And what I came up with was, you are exactly who you're supposed to be, and that is 100% enough. And those struggles you're dealing with, they're not barriers to your greatest impact, but they're frequently the path. I'd like to explore this first idea by asking a question. How much of your life have you spent wishing you were different? I know I've spent most of my life wishing I were different. Maybe I wish I had a different personality. I wish I was braver or sweeter or more, maybe goal-oriented more. I know my kids would wish I was a little bit more chill. And if I didn't wish I had a different personality, sometimes I wish I had different interests or aptitudes, like maybe I understood sports, or I liked running even a little bit, or I had a single crafty bone in my entire body. And the point is that I've spent a lot of time and energy wishing that fundamental parts of myself were different. And from the conversations I've had with clients, I know I'm not the only one. I think sometimes I wish I were different because I think that if I were, I would be happier. And those hard things in my life would feel more effortless. Or maybe I'd be able to get more meaning, and I'm always looking for that. Or maybe I'd be able to make a bigger impact. And though I agree, this is just sometimes part of the gig, that we are going to be dissatisfied with how we are, I disagree that these are areas that make us worthless or not good in God's eyes. In fact, we can lean in with confidence that God sees all of us and says that we are good and worthy just as we are. Because the verses in the Bible, they back this up. And God is a perfect God. And he looked at all of his creation and said that it was good. And it's super important for us when we're ever exploring personal growth, which is, of course, my field, to start from a place of worthiness. Because as Carl Rogers, who is the father of modern therapy, has said, we cannot change what we haven't accepted. There's so many verses in the Bible that support this idea that we are good, and God sees all of us and says that it's good. And I think it's easy for me to look at my strengths and say, yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. I think God looks at that and was like, yeah, you came up good there, girl. But I think it's hard for us to look at those weak parts of ourselves and say, God saw that and also said that it was good. But I like to think that God sees that impatience that permeates almost every cell of my body and says, good, she's going to need to work on that. She's going to need to rely on me to work on that. And it's going to create better character for her. So good might not mean uncomplicated, and it might not mean easy, but necessary, a necessary pain that will help me become the person I need to be for the impact that God has in the future for me. Some verses I like to hold on to when I am particularly struggling with this concept, maybe hypothetically I road raged on the way to church. That Genesis 1:31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Or Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So there's no pulling anything over on God, and there's no need to. He sees all of our weaknesses and says they're good. Science has slowly but surely been backing up what the Bible has been saying for thousands of years, but some really exciting scientific findings in neuroimaging, behavioral genetics, and developmental psychology have shown that we are actually born with 400 psychological traits already in us. How cool is that? And that the idea that parents are engineering their children is absolutely ludicrous. We are at best, as parents, shepherding our children into better expressions of their personality. This is a big relief for me as a parent when I have 3 little ones and I'm like, whoops. That I am just shepherding them towards better expressions of themselves. They're not little Frankensteins that are a patchwork of mine and society's expectations. But if we apply this to ourselves, we're not going to be different than how we are, but we can shepherd ourselves better. So in other words, it needs to change. All right. You can't make a Packers fan out of someone who was born with purple blood. Boo! Dad joke. This is a great look for Midwesterners, and I don't know if anybody cares about Packers and Vikings, but this is apparently a thing in Minnesota. So if we follow this logic, that God made me exactly how I am, all these weaknesses, all these personality quirks, then I have to say that the highest expression of my personality is going to be different than other people's highest expression of their personality, and that is totally okay. And I like to point this out because sometimes I believe that God has a template for what holiness looks like. Like being a Christ follower means that I have to be extroverted and love hosting, which I can assure you is not the case. We show this in the Enneagram, where we teach that there are 9 equally valid lenses that people are looking at the world through. And each of these types has great strengths and great weaknesses, and they are all different. But somehow the highest expression of each of these people's types is exactly what we need at that moment in time. We see this with two people on the screen here. We have Martin Luther King Jr. and Mother Teresa. And the internet trolls, as well as myself, believe that Martin Luther King Jr. is an Enneagram type 8, for anyone who knows the Enneagram, and Mother Teresa is potentially a type 2. And MLK was a bold, powerful visionary who spoke out for injustice. And Mother Teresa was a loving, compassionate soul who took care of those who were forgotten. These are Christ followers who have submitted their personality to God and are at the highest expression of their personality. They are wonderful, just as they are. We don't want them any more similar to each other. We want them exactly how they are. And we don't want ourselves to be different either. So in other words, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. This picture on the screen is my 6-year-old. She is part sparkles, part sriracha, all magic. And her socks have cats that have socks on. So Lenny says, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Sometimes this doesn't click. Oh, and then it clicks too much. No, it does. So it's important for us to foster this idea that we are totally worthy as we are. Because as Carl Rogers has said, we cannot change what we haven't accepted. And yet that is frequently what we do. We try to control ourselves by shaming ourselves for self-control. In fact, it's the exact opposite that we need to employ if we want to see any better expressions of our behavior. This is backed up with psychological terms like cognitive tunneling and functional fixedness, but they're all saying that when we focus so much on the problem, we don't see the solutions or the better options for those problems. And the quote on the screen from our great Carl Rogers is, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This is a bewildering paradox, but it's absolutely true, and there's lots of bodies of research out there that are backing this up. A couple of women on the screen, we have Dr. Brene Brown and Dr. Kristen Neff, have done a lot of research on this that show that when we use shame and judgment to control ourselves in order to make us better, we actually put our bodies into fight or flight. We narrow our focus in on the problem. We can't see the solutions. We have less emotional regulation and less self-control. On the other hand, when we start practicing what Dr. Brene Brown would call wholehearted living, we're able to put our bodies into rest and digest. It opens up our brains and our vision to seeing the solutions and the possibilities. We have better emotional regulation and we have better self-control. So it's important to remember that self-acceptance is not complacency. It's not saying that there's nothing about us that needs to change. It's saying we are worthy as we are. God sees us and it's good. And that is the place we can grow from then. So when we embrace who we are, then we can become who we were meant to be. The second point that I want to talk about this morning is our struggles are not barriers, but frequently our path to our greatest impact. And I believe that God has put us in these bodies, in these personalities, in these circumstances, and in these relationships so that we will become the people who can make the greatest impact in our own lives and in our communities. And this is not about toxic positivity where we pretend that really hard things are not hard. Of course they're hard. It's about allowing our psychological immune system and our Heavenly Father to make meaning of these hard things in our lives. And when we're able to do that, then we can very frequently find that the obstacle becomes the way. Psychological research, again, has backed this up with a term called post-traumatic growth. And this is talking about how when people have gone through something really hard and they get professional help, they get personal healing, they connect with their community, they actually come out on the other side showing upticks in growth, in resilience and fortitude and compassion for both themselves and the people around them. Of course, this is personally a great thing for them, but for the community, it is also beneficial. The people who have gone through these hard things are now a non-anxious presence that can sit with somebody else as they are also struggling. As James Clear, who is the author of Atomic Habits, a great book, he has written, "It is not about knowing what to say. It's about being there when nobody knows what to say. The only thing people need to hear is you are not alone, and that doesn't require words. It just requires your presence." So sometimes these struggles teach us to be present and bring a compassionate presence to the people around us. And of course, this is not me advocating for us to stay in struggles that we can remove from our lives. Of course, that's the most mature thing we can do, is to step away from things that are hard if we can. But when we can't get away from something that is very hard, the thing that is being called of us is to change ourselves and to allow God into those situations. We can become more wise from going through these things, but wisdom is not something that happens by accident. It happens by intention. Because struggles can just as easily make us kind of mean and rot us from the inside and justify behaviors that we would never justify in other contexts. So we have to be intentional about this, about seeing these struggles as something that God is putting in our lives for things that we can grow from it. As Maya Angelou perfectly sums up always, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. We will be changed by the things that happen to us, but we get a choice on if it reduces us." We're going to talk about some real-world examples now, and since it's Sunday, we're going to start with Paul and his thorn in the flesh, which I made Mom read this morning. But Paul's famous thorn in the flesh, scholars don't know if that was a psychological or a physical ailment that he was dealing with, but we do know that when he prayed for God to take it away, God's response was, "My grace is sufficient," which I'm sure is not what Paul wanted to hear at the time. Scholars have argued, though, that one of the reasons that Paul was that great leader and had that great impact in the church was because he had gone through this hard thing with this thorn in the flesh. They have argued that he developed better perseverance. He was remaining reliant on God, and he had to stay humble. He developed more compassion and more empathy because he struggled with a daily thing he couldn't get rid of. Another example of this is Abraham Lincoln, who very famously struggled with melancholy and maybe what we would call modern-day depression throughout his life. Scholars aren't sure if he had a more melancholic personality, but they do know he suffered great personal loss as well as extreme pressure throughout his presidency, and these just exacerbated it. Joshua Shank, who is an Abraham Lincoln scholar, has argued that, again, not in spite of, but because of this melancholy, Lincoln was the leader that he was at such a pivotal time in our country. They say that because he struggled with despair and sadness on a daily basis, he was more patient and had more empathy. He was more steady, and he gave grace where others might not. So that grace he was able to extend and that empathy that he was able to give others, that came from knowing what it was to suffer as a human. To quote Joshua Shank, there we go. Lincoln didn't do great work because he solved the problem of his melancholy. He did great work because melancholy itself was a source of his greatness. So this last example is from a very silly movie that I watched a very long time ago. This is from Evan Almighty, and to tee this quote up, this is the character of God, which of course is played by Morgan Freeman, He's tasked this gentleman with building an ark in modern-day America. It's very silly, very silly. But Evan has some issues with this, and he's taking God to task with not answering a prayer. And this is what God said, the character God said in a movie. Let's be clear. Let me ask you something. If someone prays for patience, do you think God gives them patience, or does he give them the opportunity to be patient? And if he prayed for courage, does God give him courage, or does he give him opportunities to be courageous? So what if our obstacles are our way? What if when we allow God into the struggles that are in our lives, we are able to develop more wisdom and patience and courage and resilience and compassion? What if we need it in our lives is already in us, but in its raw form? It might look like melancholy or depression, but really it's empathy for those who struggle. And it might look like anxiety, but really it's the seed of courage to show up for ourselves and for others. And it might look like a disadvantage, but really it's a seed of passion to stand up for those who need it. To summarize, God designed you to make the greatest impact as your authentic, transformed self, and your struggles are not your barriers. They are the path, and they're equipping you for impact. So I'd like to start wrapping up this morning with a question. What is your story? In the coaching world, we are encouraged to take areas where we have just gone through it and to find personal meaning and healing in those areas and to find ways that we can help other people as well. So what is your story? What's something that you have really struggled with? What are some ways that you can bring some personal meaning to it and have God help bring some transformation to it as well so that you can help yourself and others? Because as Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. So I would like to end with another quote from my girl Maya. That says Mary Angelou, I think. It's Maya. Maya Angelou. My wish is for you to continue to be yourself and astonish a mean world with your kindness and compassion and your empathy and your love. Pray with me. Lord, I thank you for all of our differences and all of the opportunities you give us to change and grow. I pray you will give us hope and fortitude as we navigate times that can be incredibly painful, and that you will transform us to the highest expression of ourselves. Amen.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.